Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We are starting one more week of Ethos conference. And for our first panel today, we are going to discuss about leadership for innovation and the changes caused by the pandemic situation in the innovation and technology sector. I'm Marina Ferro. I work for Ethos Institute as a manager for public policies and business practice, and I will be moderating this panel. First of all, I would like to thank our audience, the workers that are translating this panel, and our guests, of course, for joining us today in this important discussion. It's an honor to have you here today. We are broadcasting this panel live via YouTube in the Ethos Institute channel, so you can follow us to have access to the entire content of this conference. Also, for those who want to watch us in Portuguese, there is a link below this video that will direct you to the simultaneous translation for this panel. First, I will briefly present our guests. Then I will talk a little bit more about our expectations for this panel. And then I will finally invite our panelists to share their work and point of view with us. So we have here Frederik van Doors. I apologize if I'm not saying correctly. I think it's Dutch, although I speak a little bit of Dutch. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly. But Frederik is the CEO of Green Innovation Group. He has a background in anthropology and 12 years of experience with entrepreneurship and sustainability. Frederik's work has seen him advise and lecture on green innovation all over the world. Frederik works focus also on advising public and private organizations on the business opportunities in the green transition. A recent example is the new Nordisk Innovation Challenge that started commercial pilots for Novo Nordisk to implement circular solutions in their R&D department. We also have here with us today Soumitra Dutta. Again, I apologize if I'm not speaking correctly. He's currently a professor of management at and former founding dean of the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University in New York. He's the founder of the Global Innovation Index, published by the World Intellectual Property Organization, and was the co-editor of the Global Information Technology Report, published by the World Economic Forum, two influential reports in technology and innovation policy. He is also the founder and president of Portland's Institute, a nonpartisan and nonprofit research and education institution based in Washington, D.C. Soumitra also participates in several global boards for companies and also in educational institutions. As you can see, we have two experts here with us today to discuss, and we expect this panel can promote a dialogue about the relationship between economic growth and innovation systems in general, considering the impacts of the pandemic context that we are living nowadays. According to some international data, such as the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the global economic contraction in 2020 can reach almost 5% in the global economy. So it is important that the panel addresses the impacts of the pandemic situation on the innovation race and the tools that governments are adopting to support technological and scientific-based innovation and also in international scientific cooperation. What are the main changes in leadership and in the dispute for global supremacy in the field of technology and innovation? In this field, is there a common denominator between the 2008 crisis and the current crisis? Considering also that our audience here is composed by companies, what is the role for business to drive innovation using a social, ethical, and responsible behavior? Our expectation is that this dialogue can also address the opportunities for a green recovery based on science, green technology, and bioeconomy businesses. And how can we accelerate a low-carbon economy using technology and innovation for this goal? Can also innovation and technology help or be used as a tool to lead us out of an economic crisis? So we have many questions. Of course, we don't need to address them all, so I'll let you choose which ones do you want to comment. And I will start asking to Dr. Soumitra. You are, Doctor, responsible for the Global Innovation Index, one of the main indicators for sharing the degree of scientific and technological progress between countries. The 2017 study showed us that investments in research and development did not keep up with the recovery of the global economy, except in some leading countries in innovation. The study also showed that China was approaching these leading countries. How have you analyzed the impact of the pandemic in this innovation race? Of course, you can introduce yourself and comment which of the topics you want. I think it's a broad discussion here, so I'll let you start and share with us all your knowledge. Please, Dr. Soumitra.
So thank you very much, Marina, and a very good day to everyone, especially if you are in Brazil. I love your country. I usually come to Brazil about 3 or 4 times a year. Although this year, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to accept my invitation to come to Brazil. But I hope to return to Brazil next year after the pandemic hopefully is behind us. As was mentioned, I spend a lot of time researching around innovation. I talk to governments, I work with governments in many parts of the world, including in Brazil. In Brazil, we have as a very good partner, CNI, and in particular, the May movement. The May movement very much focused on industrial revolution, Industry 4.0 in Brazilian industry. Gianna is the coordinator of that. She's a very good friend and partner. So Brazil is a country which is very much engaged in the research on Global Innovation Index, innovation in general. The question was posed in terms of what will happen to innovation now, given what we have seen in the last 9 months. And let me give you my conclusion. My conclusion really is I am very optimistic that innovation will not slow down. So I'm in fact quite optimistic that innovation might in fact also accelerate in the years ahead. So let me explain why I think that's the case. And then of course, I'm sure we will have some time to discuss questions in more detail as we go on. So first of all, what we have seen in the last 6 months has been quite remarkable. We have seen a transition of entire sectors, education, finance, many parts of the service economy, moving to a remote working, remote learning mode. And this is something which has happened really very quickly. I know in my own university, we moved from 100% in-person instruction to 100% online instruction in less than 2 weeks. And if you had asked me, was this kind of a change possible even last year, mid of last year, December, I would have said, no way, it's not possible. But really what we have discovered is that technology has evolved to a point at which it makes things possible in a much more easier way. But also, I think what you discovered is this inner capacity that we have as individuals and as organizations to innovate. So, somehow the technology and the people and the processes have come together to innovate. And we should be, of course, happy on one hand, but not satisfied, because there is so much more that we can do. And it might be useful to think about the general model of technology or digital transformation that we have studied through other examples. So whenever you have a technology disruption, some new technology comes in the market, the first phase is substitution. So you were doing something with the old technology, and now you start doing the same with the new technology. Take a simple example. The automobile was invented before people were traveling by horse carriages. And after the invention of the automobile, people started traveling by automobiles and cars. So the first level of impact is substitution. The second level of impact is diffusion. Because the technology is cheaper, faster, better, somehow more effective, people start using the new technology more. So we all know that around the world, in the first 20 years of the last century, there was a rapid decline in the number of horses because people didn't need horses for transportation anymore. People switched to cars, and the number of cars kept increasing. Cars became cheaper, more standardized in factory, and so on.
I think Dr. Soumitra had a problem. Well, I don't know. Let me talk with the production to see if it's possible to wait for him or if we start listening to your presentation, Frederick. I think we might switch from him to you, considering what happened.
All right. I'm comfortable.
If I can just, yeah, it's fine for you. Can I just make a quick question? I don't know if you can comment. Of course, you're open and be comfortable to speak about your work. But about the Green Innovation Group in 2009, they published the Green Tech Challenge in Brazil, and they started to discuss the green business market and to support some Brazilian startups. And if possible, if you can also include this in your presentation, for the global south and countries like Brazil, what does it mean to get green technologies implemented?
I can do you one better and talk about what we're going to do in the future.
Okay. Okay, so be comfortable. You can start doing your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here and for putting this excellent conference, getting it up and running. That's really impressive work that you have been doing here. My name is Frederick, and I'm the CEO of Green Innovation Group. What we do is we're making green business good business. And you might ask yourself, why do we do that? Well, we do that because we have to. And we do that because it is the most crucial mission in the story of mankind to reach drawdown. What is drawdown? Drawdown is the point in time where mankind is taking out more greenhouse gases from the atmosphere than we're putting into the atmosphere. And if we do not reach that point, it will have catastrophic consequences. There are not a person in their right minds there are in any kind of doubt about it. Arnold Schwarzenegger said it quite neatly. If you had the choice between sitting inside your garage with your gasoline car on or sitting inside your garage with your electrical vehicle on, who do you think dies first? We're doing the same thing to the entire planet. Luckily, there are insanely good business reasons for supporting a green transition. And that is what we're working on in Green Innovation Group. We work in such a way that we provide advisory for the biggest public and private institutions on how to be a part of the positive change in the green transition. And here, of course, it doesn't work if we sit in Denmark and just become the most sustainable country in the world. It does not matter. We have 5 million people in Denmark. We can be as sustainable as we want. We need to get the rest of the planet with on this mission. And that means, of course, as you rightfully asked, addressing what's going on in the global south. We have a rising middle class, and we do see that we have a rising consumption of basically every single resource that we consume, be that energy or transportation or consumer goods, food, education. We spend so many resources right now, and we're going to be more people that will spend even more resources. So we have to be smarter about it. And that's what we are trying to do in Green Innovation Group, by taking the right people that have the major problems and the ones that have the great solutions, put them in the same room and get them to mix and match their ideas so they can reach deployment faster. And the main way to reach deployment is to have a good business case, because money does make the world go round. And if you just accept that premises, that it has to have a good business case in order to be able to get impact. If it doesn't have a good business case, it will be philanthropy. And look where that got us. So we need to address the green transition through the business opportunities. And we have plenty examples of green business cases, green business models that have succeeded tremendously. We're all familiar with solar energy. We're all familiar with wind energy. We're all familiar with soy milk, for instance, that's a substitute for milk, and so many other technologies that have worked incredibly well. We also know the business of rental services, for instance, where you're utilizing an asset many more times instead of having ownership of one asset in one place. So there's a lot of traditional business ways of dealing with problems, of addressing problems that are inherently sustainable. Rental services is one of them, and people seldom think about rental as something that is inherently sustainable, but it really is. And now that we are in a crisis like the one we're in, we just heard that they went in a university from 100% offline education to 100% online participation in the classes, and that to me is just fantastic. Imagine that we've had this technology, we've had this infrastructure to enable all of us to be everywhere at the same time for so long, and what it took for us to utilize it was a pandemic. Sometimes we need to get that hit in the face really, really, really hard to understand what the opportunities actually are for us. And this pandemic, if anything, has shown that telepresence and work from home will work quite tremendously for a lot of people as we get better and better connectivity. And that means that we will have less congestion in traffic. It means that we will tear the roads less. It means that we will have a much smaller need for office spaces. It means that we can actually utilize the place where we dwell for our work, and we will not have to spend a lot of time in traffic every day. So there's so many positive outcomes coming out of what, in a UN context, United Nations context, we call it telepresence. And it has been identified as one of the levers for significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But that being said, the main areas that we need to target are, we need to look at food consumption. Because right now, the way we're consuming food is just not sustainable, and it's very expensive, and it's extremely heavily subsidized. And that just means that the meat industry is just waiting to be exploited and disrupted by someone who has a cheaper, less polluting, and as healthy way of producing protein. So, if I were in agriculture, I would be scared for the life of my business right now, especially if I was relying on animal produce, because it's just not good business. It's a horrendous business case, and it takes up massive amounts of land. It releases a lot of gases, greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere, and it's a very poor calorie converter. we can be much more effective. We can be much more efficient. Another thing we need to look at inside the food sector is 1/3 of all the food waste that we have on this planet comes before it even reaches the gates of the farm. So crops are being sorted away because they are ugly, they're being sorted away because they're not big enough, or they're not small enough, or well, they have the wrong color. There can be so many things wrong with crops. Just imagine that it took us this long to turn that into a business opportunity. Right now, especially in a European context, we're seeing so many small companies, startup companies, that are thriving on taking produce that would be lost, products that companies paid to dispose of, to sell it back to the consumers. I mean, that is a fabulous business case, and it is significantly reducing the reductions tied to food production. Another place where we're also spending a lot of energy, which is quite unnecessary, is in the cold chain. So when a fruit is picked from a tree in an orchard, it is put into cold storage, and it's treated in Europe on average in 9 different facilities on its way to the basket in the supermarket for the consumer. And that is consuming intense amounts of energy. And that's something we can be smarter about, because nature is actually designed in such a way that most fruits can hang on a tree for quite a while they're ripe. So you can use the tree as a storage facility, and you can reduce the amount of times you have to sell and resell commodities in the market in order for them to reach the consumers. We have so many links where we're not actually adding value anymore, but where somewhere along the line we had the idea that spraying with different chemicals in different cold storage facilities was a really good business case, and then it came into existence. But it's just really not sensible. So one of the things that I see a lot in my work is the possibilities that are now opening with the technological development. The access to machine learning, to artificial intelligence, to Internet of Things. It means that we're able to do things on a global level in a much, much, much smarter way. It means that, problems that we used to have on a global level no longer need to be problems. We can analyze satellite photo to see where the fish streams in the oceans are by monitoring the fishing boats. And through the same satellite photos, we can actually see who are allowed to fish in those waters and who are not. And then we can call the Coast Guard and say, hey, there's an illegal vessel out there. And these things were not possible 10 years ago. They were not possible 20 years ago. There's so many things that we are able to do right now because of technological development. We're talking about having autonomous vehicles on the cars in in the streets in very few years. It means that we will actually be able to put more buses on the streets. We'll be able to share logistics. We can reduce congestion by making sure that packages are delivered when they're needed and not just as fast as possible. And what do I care if you have day-to-day delivery if I'm not home tomorrow? And this is the new logic. We're constantly getting smarter, and we're getting computers that are stronger and stronger and can actually help humans guide our decision-making processes. We can predict weather events. We can predict traffic events. We can predict political events. We can do so many things that actually gives us the tool to prepare for a future and to prepare for different scenarios. And that fills me with optimism. We recently did a project where we are still doing this project. It's a project called Norden, where we're bringing Danish companies to India for these green companies to sell their technology in an Indian context where they can really make a difference. Because in Denmark we're 5 million, in India they're 1 billion. So it's a very great place to go if you have something that can significantly reduce the impact of increasing the quality of life. And we're doing something similar with Brazil. So this year we're going to Brazil to host a small conference in the beginning of December. I'm sure we can get something out in the show notes. And that's one of the things that we're seeing, that we have so much great technology, but the main challenge is actually to export it and to get it deployed. And that's one of the key challenges for all good technologies that have hardware components. This is still something we have not fixed. How do we take great green technology and make that scale to countries where it can also be further deployed and further invested in? That's also the reason why we have recently done advisory for a 3 billion euro foundation in Denmark. It's approximately 4 billion US dollars that is dedicated only to invest in the green transition. And of course, that's something the Danish government does because they can see it's a great business case. And that's where we want to be. We need to be where the business cases are really great. If the business cases are not great, there's no way we can actually make these things happen. But we do also see that this is an area where we will create employment where those technologies are going. And one of the things that we have seen recently is also a growing appetite from the corporates. So loads of corporates contact us because they have found out that they want to be part of the green transition. They can see the writing on the wall. They can see this is the future. They can see that the talent that wants to work with them wants the green transition. They want to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. And thus we also feel that demand from the corporates, but quite often they're not necessarily sure how to approach the innovative solutions that are out there. Because the procurement department inside a corporate is per definition designed to choke out all creativity. In a procurement department, you want to get the best price that is meeting the specifications you need at the time you need and with the reliability you need. You don't need anybody to get good ideas in there. And that, of course, poses a huge challenge, because how then do you convince a procurement department that is designed for conservatism that it should purchase something it does not know, it does not understand, it has no proven traction in the market? That is the question that we need to answer. And that is why we're doing these bridging projects where we are bringing great innovative solutions into the market in major export markets like the Brazilian market or the Latin American market, where there is a huge demand, there is a huge potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and there is an appetite for developing these products. And it, at the end of the day, I'm going to share the secret sauce with all of you now, so do listen. The secret lies in making people talk to one another. It is seldom more complex than that. They will find a way if the business case is there, because money makes the world go round, and green business is good business. And I hope that in some way, shape, or form answered your question.
Yeah, sure you did. Yeah, I think, oh, we have Dr. Soumitra again. I have a few questions for you, Frederick, but I think I will first invite Dr. Soumitra to end his presentation, and then we can go back to you. I think you shared some important business cases. I would like you to share with us more cases in the South, if you have some experience or some cases that really caught your attention. In this case, in Indonesia, doesn't need to be in South America only, of course, but in other continents. And I will ask Dr. Soumitra to end his presentation, then we can go back to you, okay? Thank you. Dr. Soumitra,
yeah, thank you very much
for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry for the small internet technology hiccup, but I think all of us are used to these kinds of hiccups these days. So I was just briefly saying that I'm very cautiously optimistic that innovation will not just slow down, but might in fact accelerate. The example I was giving out there was about how technology change actually happens in 3 stages. The first stage is substitution, the old technology by the new. The second stage is diffusion. More and more people start using the new technology just simply because it's cheaper and better. And the third stage is transformation. So because the new technology is so widely available and everyone has access to it, the ways in which people live and work starts changing. So if you take the automobile example once again, the whole notion of shopping malls, the whole idea of creating suburbs, this basically relies on everyone, or at least a large part of the population, having access to cars. Now, if you think about the digital acceleration that has happened in the COVID time, we have had a very rapid acceleration of the diffusion phase in many sectors. Education and many service sectors, the technology has been diffused very rapidly. And what we are going to see in the future now is this rapid experimentation of transformation. So what will online learning look like? What will remote work from home look like? What will virtual events like these look like? All that will change a lot. So, we can be absolutely certain that in the next 5 years or the next 10 years, there will be so much more innovation happening in education and events, in remote work at home, and the way we live and work will get transformed. So there's a lot of fundamental change that will happen just simply because we have been pushed up the diffusion curve. In the introductory comments, a comment was also made about the crisis. And of course, what will happen in this crisis compared to the last crisis? The last crisis was the 2008 and 2009 global financial crisis. Now, what is interesting is if you go and look at the rates of investment in R&D as one element of how you measure innovation, as was introduced, I spent a lot of time studying innovation as part of the Global Innovation Index. And if you just take that one very important metric of investment in R&D, historically, the rate of growth of investment in R&D was roughly parallel to the rate of growth of GDP. Now, what happened after 2008, 2009 was something quite remarkable. First of all, we noticed that in many countries, the R&D investment rates did not even change at all. So for example, in Argentina, Chile, China, Costa Rica, Egypt, France, India, Korea, Mexico, Poland, Turkey, zero change, despite the financial crisis. In some other countries, there was a small change, but that change was quickly corrected. Brazil, Germany, Israel, UK, Singapore, South Africa, examples of countries like this. So what you saw was that the small dip either did not happen or was corrected very quickly. And you also saw that the rate of investment in innovation, R&D, actually increased at a faster pace than the rate of growth of GDP. So there was a diversion of the rates of investment in innovation as measured by R&D investment and the rate of growth of GDP. And that happened primarily because the private sector stepped in. So in many cases, the governments reduced the level of investment in R&D and R&D expenditure, but the private sector stepped in and they increased the investment rate simply because there were so many opportunities that opened up because of technology progress, the whole digitalization that happened in the last 10 years. So if you think about now the next years, there is a very important question about whether or not the investment in R&D will decrease or will in fact keep on increasing. Now, there's a good case to be made for the argument that the rate of increase in R&D will keep on increasing. And the reason is because four sectors, really four sectors: information technology hardware, information technology software and services, pharmaceuticals, and automobiles. Those four sectors comprise roughly 80% of the private sector investment in R&D. And if you think about the whole digital acceleration that has happened in the last few months, these four sectors, in fact, have increased the innovation rates. There is more money being invested in R&D innovation in these four sectors. Yes, some sectors like tourism, hospitality, travel have been hit very hard. And it is quite likely that in many of these sectors, many companies will suffer and might in fact go out of business. But what we can be sure is there will be restructuring in these sectors. There will be a tourism, travel industry that will come out of this post-COVID crisis. And it is quite likely that the survivors and the winners in the post-COVID era will in fact be companies that will innovate using technology most likely, but will innovate to come up with new models of travel, innovation, hospitality, tourism. So there's a good argument to be made that even the private sector role in innovation will in fact increase in the future. And this is what I feel is going to happen, and at least this is my personal point of view, is the forces are such that innovation will in fact continue at a healthy rate, will accelerate, and that puts a lot of opportunities, at the same time stresses on organizations to keep up with the rate of innovation. Because if you do not keep up with the rate of innovation, you will be left behind. Your customers are in fact asking for things to be done differently. Your customers might be in fact ahead of the curve in many cases. And it is a challenge to be constantly looking at how to do things differently such that you're able to not just provide value, but be ahead of the curve vis-a-vis technology and vis-a-vis your customers. Let me stop out there and maybe I'll answer other questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soumitra, for sharing with us. We are very glad that you could join us again. Well, I think in both presentations, you both highlighted in different ways that we are living in an ongoing technological revolution. It seems to us that there is no way back. We are all only improving and increasing and leaving these shifts in processes and sectors, in services, and this might increase even more. So we have probably will be experiencing this in the next 20 or I don't know, maybe the humankind will only live about this revolutionary technological revolution from now on. But I would like to ask you also from the different point of views that you have. First, for Frederick, I asked you before if you have other cases in other countries, but also if with this technological revolution, because we are very optimistic, I think you both also are very optimistic about this, but how technological tools and all this shift can also help us to break some structures that are part of our global system in terms of races, inequalities, corruption, or will this technological revolution increase something that is part of our structure that is already bad? Let's put it like that. But how can we use this also for a shift? As you, Frederick, said a lot about the green economy, but how this green economy can also be an inclusive economy, an ethical economy. And for Dr. Soumitra, I will ask you, there is a question from the audience, sorry. Someone is asking if you know the work of the an economist called Mariana Mazzucato. She highlights a very special role to what she calls entrepreneurial states. And she's asking if do you agree that we have a deviated look at the private sector when it is the state that invests most in the cutting edge technology? And if possible, I'd like you to ask about the role of governments and private sectors, thinking about the role all actors in society, how can we work together? And Frederick, you're from Denmark, I think, so you have a very special case in green economy. Denmark is a case of success in general as a state that really finance for this shift. And how can we also learn from this experience, and how can we share some of these business cases in your experience that can help the world also to do this shift that Denmark is already in this path?
Yeah, for sure. I think to address the question of how can the green transition and the technologies make things more inclusive, we're already seeing with internet access in smartphones how much leverage for democracy it has had. All of a sudden, any citizen is able to record a case of police brutality, whereas before you would need an entire TV crew to move out to document something like that. So I think that's on the equality and inclusion side of things. The fact that we all in our pockets have access to maybe 90% of all knowledge ever produced in the world is absolutely mind-blowing. And that is something that is already changing the world as we know it. This is what enables sharing economy technologies where you can get access rather than ownership, meaning that you need a much smaller investment in order to access something. You don't have to own a car in the US to transport yourself. You have many ride-sharing services. You can discuss how are the conditions for the people that are working and operating and driving these ride-sharing services. But just the fact that we all have access to it through our cell phones is quite incredible. On top of that, when we're talking about corruption, of course, it is proven time and time again that the best way to fight corruption is by educating the population. And access to knowledge is, of course, a major theme here. So I think a more interesting question to ask for us right now, rather than how will we reach equality and inclusion, because I think that will come. It's just a matter of time before we will reach a way more equal and inclusive world. The question that we really need to ask ourselves is, what do we do with information flooding, and how do we handle living in a post-factual world? That's where there's a real challenge in terms of how do we deal with all that information? How do we deal with someone spreading information that is inherently false with the intention of creating confusion? That to me is the real question in that dilemma. But you asked me if I could bring up some cases that have worked in the global south, and of course I'd be delighted to do that. There's of course an entire world of great green innovation that has been deployed so many places. I'm personally very excited about two cases that we traveled to India with as part of the Northern project that is financed by the Foundation of Industries, and we in Green Innovation Group run that project together with Asia House and the Confederation of Danish Industries and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark. And here we have brought Danish SMEs to scale that technology on the ground in India. And two cases that I took a lot of inspiration from. One of them is called EcoBeta, and it's a fairly simple technology. They have created the thing that you push when you flush a toilet, and instead of spending all of the water, it will spend half. And it's simply a nudging technology where you need to push a hardware button for a few seconds for it to release an entire flush, and that saves tremendous amounts of water. And they have had a lot of success deploying in India, where the toilets are not completely new, but it's more challenging for them to deploy in Europe, where the toilets have been changed in the past 10 or 15 years. So that to me is a really great example of an incredibly simple technology that is saving a lot of resources, and also in that way providing more safety for the local populations. Another one that I'm really excited about is a company called Shark Solutions. They found a way to take the windshields of cars. They consist of 2 pieces of glass that are glued together. And they've managed to separate the glass and the glue and sell them as different products. So that's another technology that is strikingly simple in some ways. I mean, of course, it's a high technologically advanced machine that does it, but you would think that the problem was easy to solve, but it just wasn't. But now they can sell and recycle the windows of cars. So that is pretty fantastic. You know, these are resources that used to be dormant. And we have so many examples of resources that can be utilized in a better and in a smarter way. There's a Swedish company that I'm very excited about called Oatly that just recently raised, I think it was $200 million to do an alternative to milk that is based on oats. And you know, if you can start using oat milk instead of animal milk, then you have significant greenhouse gas reductions. And you know, this is also showing that the market is getting to a maturity stage where even private equity investors are actually ready to invest in these things. And they can be deployed everywhere, and they can be distributed everywhere. And to me, that's really exciting. There's also technologies like vertical farms that get me quite excited right now, because that is the frontier of innovation. It's something that we know it works now, but we do not know that vertical farms work to such a degree that you can walk down into any bank and ask for a loan to establish a vertical farm business. But you could walk into any bank and ask for a loan to support a wind farm or a solar farm. And to me, that's really interesting when we're at that threshold right before the maturity where the traditional financial sector is ready to actually put money into something. I see a lot of different technologies where we're reaching that area fast, but where regulation is, of course, also a massive challenge. We're seeing that with edible insects, where it's in many countries, it's actually not possible to do edible insects as human consume food. Because, you know, sometimes the insects will eat one another, or the insects will eat the manure of other animals. And, you know, there's all kinds of regulations in place that makes it impossible to actually produce and sell this as a food item. And then you will end up producing and selling it as feed for other animals that can then eat the proteins in it. But you know, there's a lot of very interesting innovation going on right now. We also need to ask that the ethical question: if we start growing meat inside a laboratory, what kind of ethical implications are there? If we have robot technologies that can take over the assembly line work and the production line work of the people on the floor, what are the implications of that on a societal level, especially for states that do not have the level of security as we have in Scandinavia, where, you know, Mother Denmark will always take care of us, or at least for a few more years until we have hollowed out the state. But there's some significance in that you also risk destabilizing a country if no one can work anymore, and if no one can earn their own bread. So there's a lot of very interesting problems on the horizon for us to figure out how are we going to solve it. Are we going to solve it through universal basic income, for instance? That could be a way. Are we going to have entrepreneurial states? That is another model that could work. Will the entrepreneurial state be a consequence of universal basic income? There are so many questions here that we need to think long and hard on, and the development is going much faster than what we used to be able to think. So it's inherently difficult for the human brain to understand exponential growth. And we are looking at exponential growth in technological development. That just means that the reality we look at in 10 years, we have no clue what's going to happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Frederick, for sharing with us. I'm sorry, we have a matter of time of our panel. So I will ask Dr. Soumitra to make his presentation, and then we have to end the panel. Unfortunately, it's a very interesting conversation, and we can speak for a long time about these issues. But I would like to add another question, Dr. Soumitra, on your the question before I made, because someone also asked from the audience, adding to this, you said about the investments, even in a crisis period, countries seems to not stop investing on technology. This doesn't change from your speech. So, but what about some governments that are against or some kind of regulation that Frederick also said about the green economy, but there are countries like for United States or even Brazil that governments go against some consensus, international consensus, such as climate change. So how can we work on this technology thinking about a sustainable society? What are the roles of governments and business in this regard?
So I'm mindful of the time, so I only have 3 or 4 minutes, so I'll try and be very quick. So the first thing I want to address is the question of inequality. And let me say that the research shows that digitalization is increasing inequality, not decreasing it. And this is a big problem. Even today, more than 40% of the world does not have access to the internet. If you actually come to the quality of the data access is even more worrying. In the midst of this remote learning environment, even in a country like the US, about 22% of all households did not have access to the internet. So we have a big issue out here in terms of how digitalization is actually increasing, not decreasing inequality, because the rich people or rich economies with more skills, more networks, more technology are able to create wealth at a faster pace than the poorer people, poor economies with less technology, less skills, and less networks. The second question is about state. I think I completely agree that the state has a very important role to play. Certainly the success of China is the role model out there, but there are many other countries. I cannot think of a single country where, let's say, they're leading in innovation and the state has not played a key role in that innovation success story, including in the US, by the way. Almost all key technologies, including, for example, the internet, the GPS, and so on, was driven by government support, government R&D investment. And in fact, today, one can argue that the current Trump administration is behaving in a way very much like the Chinese government might behave in imposing sanctions on various technology companies, trying to advance the technology security of the country, and in fact, taking decisions to enhance the technology leadership of the country. So what is the role of the state? Very, very critical. Different states do it differently. Each country has to find its own way to actually play a role in stimulating the local economy, the innovation. And I think the examples of different types of innovation, let's say intervention, the states play a role in each country. The third question is about regulation and about green economies. I think the pressure and the need to find green solutions, as Frederick correctly identified, is very high on the agenda. Most countries today agree to the need for doing so. I think most citizens, or many citizens, see the need to do so. It is unfortunate that some countries, and the US not alone, I think out here, even people raise finger at other countries too, have sometimes taken policies that are not in favor of green economies. Hopefully these are transitionary things that don't last. I think that ultimately the people need and the people desire will in fact force governments to come to some kind of a common regulation on these very important issues. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We hope for that the drive and the will of the population and the society will push for this for governments. So we would like to thank you very much for these presentations. Unfortunately, we have to end this panel, and I would like to invite the audience to keep on watching us. We have more panels today, 3 more panels. The next one will be 4 o'clock. And for more information about the program today, you can visit the website of the Ethos Conference and Ethos Institute. The link is below this video. So thank you very much, and we hope to keep on to keep in touch with you guys. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for having us here.
All right.
Minerar na Amazônia é lapidar uma joia preciosa, joia que está embaixo do solo e sobre ele. Em plena Amazônia brasileira, a Alcoa desenvolve um projeto de mineração sustentável, da lavra do minério até a reabilitação das áreas, produzir bauxita de alta qualidade, superar todos os desafios e estabelecer um legado de sustentabilidade na Amazônia.
Em um mundo em transformação, como reinventar nossas ações? Nosso mundo mudou, está mudando, cada vez mais rápido. Vivemos o desafio coletivo de repensar nosso jeito de fazer. Somos convocados a descobrir novas formas de avançar, formas mais coletivas, sustentáveis e circulares. Isso pode ser feito, e é um exercício constante, um exercício do agora que pode transformar nosso futuro.
Esse vídeo é um oferecimento da Gol,
que faz parte do projeto Aproximando Distâncias.
Dentro desse projeto Aproximando Distâncias, a gente vai ter uma loja virtual, onde a pessoa vai poder adquirir produtos e obras de artistas do Brasil inteiro.
Fortalecer os trabalhadores.
Dar um up no comércio, no turismo, somar força conosco.
Acesse o site aproximandodistancias.com.br e cadastre os seus produtos.
Muito obrigada.
Vamos lá?